Hi there, my name is Tabitha, and although I would consider myself to be a happy and easygoing person, I wasn't always like this. In fact, there were many years that I struggled to find my place in this world. You see, it all started when I graduated from university. I can still remember how excited I was when at my graduation ceremony. With my diploma in my hands, I was so hopeful for what my future was going to look like, and my parents couldn't be more proud of me. But then, it came time to hit the streets and find myself a career, and that was quite the rude awakening. The first few interviews I thought went really well, but they always ended with the same response.
Sorry, but we are looking for someone with at least 5 years of experience.
It was absurd. How was I supposed to get experience unless someone hired me and gave me a chance to learn, especially fresh out of school? My mind was a blank slate, and I was ready to learn whatever it was that they wanted to teach me. The first month flew by, and I was no closer to landing a good job, and I was nearly resigned to just settle for working at a fast food restaurant when I booked an interview with the Big Crane Construction Company. I didn't know the first thing about construction work, but I wasn't picky. I needed to get out into the workforce and start earning money so that I could pay off my student loans, and while it was only a position as a secretary, I knew that it was something that I could definitely do. Plus, maybe with time there would be opportunities to move up in the company, or if I networked with the right people, maybe it would present opportunities in other fields that would be more desirable. The day I walked into my future boss's office, I felt a bit unnerved by the way he looked me up and down. He leered at me, and it made me picture the way a lion would size up a gazelle, but I swallowed that thought down and tried to ignore the uneasiness that I was feeling. After all, I needed this job, and so I smiled and ignored his looks.
So, miss, your resume is a bit thin, but looking at you, I think that you show promise. But be honest, how badly do you want this job?
His question was quite direct, and it made me feel even more uneasy, but my smile didn't waver. Well, sir, I did go to university, and I do have some student loans to pay back, so this job would be ideal for helping me to pay those back. And I understand that I don't have a lot of experience, but I'm an eager and quick learner. I promise that I'll give it my all to meet your expectations. The way he smiled and chuckled made my nerves feel on edge.
I see. Well, I'm going to give you a try and see how you work out. I can be pretty hard to work for, though, so I hope you have thick skin.
Swallowing hard, I thanked him, and the next day I started working for him as his secretary. To be honest, he was rather patient and understanding those first few weeks. I would get his coffee order wrong, and he politely corrected me and told me how he preferred it. Or I would take down a message from a potential client, and the message would be missing some important piece of information, but he brushed it off as a simple mistake. After a month, though, I had found my stride, and I began to do my job quite well. I was no longer making any mistakes, and on more than one occasion he complimented my performance, saying that I was doing a great job. It was my first real job, and I honestly felt really happy. Here I was, out in the real world, making a real go of being an adult, and I was succeeding. It felt amazing. But that all changed when he announced that there was a special construction conference that we needed to travel to. He made it sound fascinating and like a lot of fun, and even promised to pay for my hotel room, so I began to look forward to it. A few weeks later, we were in the capital city at one of the fanciest hotels I had ever stayed in. It was like a fantasy. The conference itself was okay. The displays were made up of a bunch of construction equipment which didn't really interest me, and when we weren't looking at machines, we were in the hotel bar hanging out with contractors and men similar to my boss. By the last day, I was eager to just go home as I wasn't having any fun, and I didn't feel like I was learning anything there. Other than, when my boss began to drink, that he began to leer at me again. The last night that we stayed there, we were once again in the bar having drinks, and he told me that he needed me to help him write a letter to the organizer of the convention, and that he wanted to write it up and send it before we went to bed that night. Hesitantly, I said that I would help him and followed him up to his room. As soon as we were alone in his room, he threw me on the bed and attacked me. I did try to fight back, but he was so much stronger than me. After he was finished, he told me to get out and that he would ruin my entire life if I ever dared to tell anyone. With tears in my eyes, I believed his threats and I ran out of his room. The next day, I tried to act normally at work, but at lunchtime I couldn't hold it in anymore, and so I went outside to sit in the park across the street and cry. I figured no one from the office would see me there, but I was wrong. Debbie, one of the accountants for the company, had apparently been keeping an eye on me since we came back from the conference, and as soon as she saw me run out of the building, she followed. "Hey there, Tabitha. Are you okay?" No, I'm not, but I can't say anything. I could tell by the way that she looked at me that I didn't need to say anything. She could already tell what had happened. "Well, unfortunately, you aren't the first secretary that he's done this to. He needs to be stopped, but so far none of the other women would agree to come forward, and since he never did anything to me, I can't really help. It's just my word versus his." "How many others were there?" Debbie then handed me a piece of paper with a list of names and phone numbers. There were at least a dozen names on the sheet. I thanked her and went home to try to figure out what to do next. I knew that if I just quit, that he would hire someone else and he would no doubt just end up harming someone else. But at the same time, I wasn't sure that I was brave enough to take him to court. In the end, though, I knew that it was the right thing to do. But first I had to call all the women on that list and try to get them to come forward as well. Maybe if we all did, then it would help us bring justice against this evil man. And so I began calling all the names on the list, and not a single one answered their phones. I left messages on their answering machines, telling them what I planned to do and that he had hurt me too. But I didn't get a single call back. It was so depressing, but I knew deep down that I needed to proceed with bringing him down. So I went and got myself a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against him for what he did. The day after my lawyer served my former boss with legal paperwork, I got a nasty surprise. Even though truth was on my side, my former boss was countersuing me for defamation of character. He claimed that I had got him drunk and that it was me that took advantage of him. That all my allegations were complete lies. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And to make matters worse, my lawyer told me to drop the case as my boss had far too many lawyers, and that it would be far too costly for me to fight him in court, and that I would probably end up losing. It was an absolute nightmare. I knew that I was in the right, but this evil man was going to get away with what he did to me. Filled with despair and frustration, I was nearly ready to dismiss my case and just let the vile man win. But then, as if my prayers were answered, my lawyer called me up and told me that the other women on the list contacted him and wanted to file suits against my former boss as well. With over a dozen women all making the same claim against him, it no longer was such a sure case anymore. And some had even recordings of their attacks, which made their stories even more believable. In the end, the amount of evidence against Henry was just too overwhelming, and not only did each of his victims get a sizable cash settlement, but Henry ended up going to prison. The courts ruled in completely in our favor, and with the weight of his crimes, they found that he was a danger to society and sentenced him to a few decades in prison. Justice had been served. I mean, the tragedy is that we all had to suffer because of what he did to us, but the money would help us get the help that we needed to learn to cope with the pain, and it would help us all financially while we healed. Plus, we all had the satisfaction that it would never happen again to anyone else. Thanks for watching, like, share, and subscribe.
Hello there. My name is Amanda, and I haven't had a very easy life. Growing up, my mother would constantly be verbally abusive to me, calling me worthless and pathetic. When she would drink, she would even hit me with whatever was close at hand. Sometimes she used a golf club, and one time she even used a frying pan. At the time, I didn't know why she was so mean to me, and I just assumed that it had been something that I had done. I was constantly walking on eggshells trying to avoid her so that I didn't upset her and get hurt. To make matters worse, my father always just ignored it when it happened. pretending not to see what my mother was doing to me. The physical abuse ended, though, once I was old enough and stronger and taller than my mother. But the emotional abuse didn't stop. It was always so frustrating, because around the rest of our family or our neighbors, my mother would behave like a saint. In fact, many people would compliment me on how amazing of a person she was, but I knew that it was all an act. Thankfully, my father worked for a large company and made very good money, and when I was old enough, we were able to afford for me to go away for school. They were some of the best years of my life since my school was on the other side of the country. I rarely ever spoke to either of my parents, which made avoiding my mother's abuse very easy. And it was there at school that I met Joseph. We were in many of the same classes and we hit it off right away. We liked the same movies and bands and even the same foods. After college, we kept in touch, and not long after we started dating and eventually got married. I tried to tell my husband about how terrible my parents had been to me growing up, and he tried to understand, but he had grown up in a happy house where his parents loved him, which made it hard for him to understand what I had gone through. But he did agree that we should keep our distance from them. He wanted me to be happy, and while he didn't understand why I was so angry at my parents, he did understand that it was for the best for my mental health to cut ties with them. After a few years, though, my mother began to reach out to me. It turned out that my father had left her for a much younger woman, someone almost as young as me, and even though he had left her the house as well as a large sum of money, that she was feeling lonely and rejected. Apparently, he moved to a faraway country, never to be heard from again. Over the phone, she tried to guilt-trip me into feeling sympathy for her, but I just couldn't. She had made my childhood a living hell, and now she was trying to butt back into my life now that I finally had found happiness. At first, I was able to shoot her down, but eventually she got in touch with Joseph and she managed to fool him into thinking that she had changed and that she was a good person. I didn't trust her, but I agreed to let her begin coming over for visits. At first, she did appear to be a different person, and even apologized for what she had done to me as a child. According to her, my father had never been faithful, and while it wasn't right of her to do, she took out her frustrations on me every time my father would cheat on her. It didn't make it right, of course, but I finally did understand why she had done what she did. Slowly, she began to visit more often, and even after she apologized, I found it hard to trust her. Until one day I came home early from work and then understood what my intuition was trying to tell me. There, laying in my bed with my husband, was my mother. I couldn't believe my eyes. They were in our bed having sex. Shocked, I panicked and ran out of the room and went for a drive. After a few hours, I cleared my head and then went home, but when I got there, the two of them were gone. The next day, I called my mother to scream at her, and my husband answered the phone and told me that he had fallen in love with her and that it would be best for me to not call there again. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He sounded like he had gone mad. I knew my mother was great at manipulation, but this was insane. And then I got the idea to go and speak with his parents. If I couldn't talk sense into him, maybe they could. And so I drove over to their house and told them about what had happened. They didn't believe me at first, but then I convinced them to go with me to my mother's house to prove it to them. Once there, I led them into my mother's house, and as soon as my mother saw us, she became violent and a fight broke out. My own mother hit me several times and bruised me quite badly and even bloodied up Joseph's father's nose. After a few minutes, though, I was able to calm everyone down enough for the fighting to end, and Joseph spoke up.
I'm sorry, Amanda, but I don't love you anymore. I love your mother, and I want a divorce so that I can marry her.
Neither his parents or I could believe what he was saying. But if this is what he wanted, then I would be forced to give it to him. And so we left. The months that followed were quite hazy for me. I was feeling depressed and had a hard time functioning, but I did make it through. I got a lawyer and filed for divorce. Since I had done nothing wrong, I was able to sue both of them for alimony and got $45,000 from each of them. The money wouldn't make me happy, but it did help me to get back on my feet. I moved away and found myself a new house to live in, along with a new job as well. It was the best thing for me. I made new friends and found that my new job was very challenging, but also a better fit for me. It paid better than my old job, and even had better hours as well. Just as everything began to fall into place, though, for me. My ex-husband called me. How he got my new number, I don't know, but he began to complain about my mother. Apparently, not long after I left town. My mother became sick, and the strange illness slowly made her more and more ill. They eventually were able to put her on medication to help her get better. But by that time, the illness had left her stuck in a wheelchair and unable to take care of herself. Exhausted and desperate for help, my ex-husband called me up and was trying to get me to lend a hand.
Please, she is your mother. You need to come and give a hand helping her. I can't do it on my own.
You should have thought of that before you cheated on me with her. As far as I'm concerned, the two of you are dead to me.
You don't understand. She can't even use the bathroom by herself, and she is so incredibly mean and constantly calls me nasty names.
Oh, that's where you are wrong. I do understand. She did the exact same thing to me growing up. Joseph, you made this choice, and now you have to deal with the consequences of that choice. And with that, I hung up and blocked his number. A small part of me empathized with him, but it was true that he had made a choice to cheat on me with her, and then he chose to marry her. Everything after that was all his problem. Just because he now regretted it didn't make the pain that he had caused me to go away. After that, I didn't hear from them again, but I did hear from mutual friends of ours how he was doing. By the sounds of it, he and my mother had blown through all of my mother's money that she had gotten from my father and were now living very poorly. Whenever my friends saw my ex-husband, he was always wearing torn and dirty clothes, and it was obvious that they were struggling financially. After all, his parents had disowned him after what he had done to me, and he didn't have the money to put my mother in a home which would free him from the responsibility of caring for her. It's very unfortunate, but that's what happens when you're a terrible human being. Thanks for watching.
Hey there, my name is Jamie, and here is my story. Let me start by saying that my parents have never been good people. They began leaving me home alone when I was only 7. When they were home, they ignored me, but if I made a mess or bothered them, then they would scream at me. It felt like they never wanted children and that I was an unwanted accident. In school, when I would tell my friends how I was being treated, no one believed me. They all thought I was making up stories. As soon as I was old enough, I got a job and I saved every last penny. My plan was to move out when I turned 18, and in order to do that, I needed money to be able to afford to live on my own and possibly to go to school. After all, I didn't want to work at a fast food restaurant my entire life. And I needed an education if I was ever to make something of myself. I tried to keep how much money I had a secret from my parents, as I knew that if they knew that I had money, that they would no doubt find a way to take it, and my plans would be ruined. I lied and made it look like whatever I was earning, that I spent it on clothes or other useless stuff. When I turned 16, I had $25,000 saved up, and I knew that while I needed more, that I was doing well. Over the years, my Uncle Larry noticed how hard I was working, and more than once I confided in him about how much I was saving. I never actually told him what I planned to do with the money, but I think he had suspicions. He was always kind to me and understood how awful my parents were. Things were okay, until Uncle Larry came over crying. I had never seen him sad before, and it worried me. It turned out that he had been diagnosed with cancer, and they had only given him months to live. I couldn't believe it. I was horrified for my uncle. After that day, though, my parents began acting strangely around me. They were so kind and considerate, making me dinner rather than forcing me to fend for myself. They even began buying me things and telling me how much they loved me. At first, I was pretty skeptical as they had never done anything like this before. I thought that maybe they had seen my uncle's situation and realized that they were squandering their relationship with me. That, of course, wasn't the case, but I was pretty naive and I rather enjoyed the attention. The months went by quickly, and my uncle became sicker with each passing day until one day he passed away. I had never cried more than I did on that day. My uncle was the one person in my life that I actually loved, and loved me back. and now he was gone. After the funeral, my parents were still acting the same though, and I was relieved that they had turned over a new leaf, and that maybe it had taken the tragedy of my uncle's passing to get them to finally be parents. After a few weeks, my parents told me that I needed to go and speak with a lawyer. They made up something about my uncle leaving me his car in his will. My uncle had owned a muscle car, and I wanted it more than anything. Once we got to the lawyer's office, stacks of paperwork were thrust in front of me, and I was told to sign them all. Hey, what exactly am I signing? The lawyer was about to speak when my father shushed him and then cut him off. It's just some paperwork that states that the car your uncle left you is yours, but since you aren't old enough to drive, that we will hold on to it until you are 18 and can assume ownership. What he was saying kind of made sense, and so I kept signing. Once we got home, my parents reverted to their old selves. I tried to ask them what was for dinner, and they told me that I was old enough to figure dinner out on my own. I was a little shocked, but not half as shocked as the next day when my father came home in a fancy new sports car. My mom was in the passenger seat and was wearing expensive jewelry. Guys, where did you get the money for all that stuff?
From you? My God, you are such an idiot. Your uncle left you $100,000 and you signed it over to us along with your bank account. Although we were surprised to find out how much you had in it. We expected there to be a few $100s, but $25,000? Thanks for the money, son.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and so I ran inside and jumped on my computer to check my account balance. It was zero. They had completely drained it. I stormed downstairs to confront them. How could you do that to me? I worked hard for that money. That money wasn't yours to keep anyways. After all, we put a roof over your head and kept you fed. You owed that money to us, and if you don't like it, then you can get out. Angrily, I grabbed my backpack and filled it with overnight stuff and headed over to my friend's house. When I got there, though, the lights were all off, and it appeared that no one was home, and so I headed back home only to find that all of the doors were locked. I knocked and yelled, but my parents never opened the door. That night, I slept outside and then returned in the morning when I was told by my parents to leave and never come back. They were throwing me out. I didn't know what to do. I had left my cell phone in my room when I left and had no way of getting a hold of anyone. I tried to go to my friends for help, but my parents had called their parents and told them that they had to kick me out because I was dealing drugs. I couldn't believe that my friends' parents believed their lies, but they did, and so I was turned away from every house I went to. Desperate, I began to beg on the street, and people felt sorry for me and gave me what they could. It was never much, but I survived. Weeks passed, and then months, until one day I was begging on a street corner when a man that I recognized walked by. It was my grandfather, and I ran up to him to beg him to help me. He was surprised to see me, and he was about to walk away. Apparently, my parents had told the same lies about me to the whole family as well. But after a few minutes, I was able to convince him that it was a lie, and then I told him what really happened. The look of surprise on his face was almost painful. Instantly, he took me by the arm and dragged me home where he fed me and demanded that I take a hot shower. Later, he sat me down and told me that he was sorry that he had believed the lies about me and that if I wanted to, that I was welcome to live with him. I accepted immediately and promised him that I would get a job and that I would help with the bills. He laughed and told me that it wouldn't be necessary as he was quite rich. The only thing that I had to do was go to school and study hard. I couldn't believe it. Not only did I have a roof over my head, but my grandfather was willing to pay for me to go to school. I felt so blessed. The years passed, and I graduated from school and became a doctor. Not long after that, my grandfather passed away, and since we had formed such a strong bond, he left his house to me in his will, along with hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was saddened at his passing and vowed to make the best of the gift that he had left me. No sooner had my grandfather been laid to rest than my parents showed up at my house and demanded that I give them money. It turned out that they burned through my uncle's inheritance in months, but had kept spending money and had so much debt that they had lost their house and were living out of a motel. Their clothes looked like rags, and both of them smelled like they hadn't showered in days. I looked at them disappointingly and then slammed the door in their faces. There was no way I could forgive them for how they raised me, and then had stolen everything from me. For all they knew, I could have died living on the streets, and now they had the gall to demand money from me after everything they had done? Fat chance of that happening. Please like the video for the algorithm.
I'm Rose. I work as a graphic designer for a large tech company. I live with my husband Daniel in our cozy little house. Although it isn't very big, it fits the both of us really well, plus some extra room for when we have guests over. My husband worked as a bus driver for the local school, and with me working late hours for my tech company, we didn't really have too much time to spend together. At most, we'd only have a couple of hours a day, and sometimes we didn't see each other at all until after he'd gone to sleep. I felt sort of bad about it, but there wasn't much I could do. Living on opposite shifts did make things difficult at times. That is, until COVID hit. The world was going through a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and a lot of people began to get laid off from their jobs and lost their pay. Thankfully, I wasn't one of them. My job was pretty independent from the other people at my company, so I was allowed to go to work still. But my husband wasn't so lucky. They shut down the schools so kids could do online classes instead, leaving Daniel without a job. I thought this would be the perfect time to rekindle our relationship, but Daniel spent all the time moping about how he lost his job. I let him grieve for a while, but after a week of nonstop complaining and moaning, I was getting a little tired of it. I just felt that he needed to snap out of it. After all, the pandemic would end, and he could either return to his old job or find a different one. Finally, he began to improve slightly. He stopped moping around, but he still seemed like a shell of the man I loved. But one day, he suddenly perked up again. He was happy and smiling and seemed like a new man. When I asked him what was going on, he told me he had a surprise for me after work. I was so excited, I couldn't believe he had gotten me a gift after all this time. Maybe it was the set of earrings I had told him I wanted. But when I got home, it wasn't a pair of earrings or jewelry or even a present at all. Instead, I found his mother waiting for us in the kitchen.
I invited my mother to stay with us. She lost her job because of the pandemic as well. So I said she could stay here for a bit until she recovers.
What?
I know! She's moving into the guest room. Isn't it great?
I tried to be supportive and loving to my husband, but I couldn't believe he had made such a big decision without even consulting me, especially during a unique situation as a pandemic. I'd met his mother a few times before this, and she'd always been kind to me, but it was something entirely different for her to move in like this. After all, our home was small, and I had no way of knowing if she would mesh well with our lifestyle. In the end, I decided for the sake of our marriage that she could stay. Boy, would I ever regret that decision. The next few days, things went well. Daniel was happy again, and I was off to work, and my mother-in-law was happily situated in our guest room. But soon, she began to make weird comments to me like, "Why aren't the dishes done yet?" Or, "Why is my son's room so messy? Haven't you cleaned it yet?" Finally, after a few days of this, I got tired of it, so I explained to her that Daniel and I split the chores. He cleans up half of the time, and I do it the other half. On my nights, the house is always spotless, but Daniel's room is always a mess. He rarely cleans up after himself, but as long as it doesn't bother me, then I don't clean it up for him. But then I began to notice an attitude shift in Daniel. He began to act cruel to me and started demanding more of me even after work. I was fine doing my fair share of the chores around the house, but he was making me do his chores as well. I wondered what got into him until I heard his mother talking to him.
You can't let her take advantage of you like this. She's the woman of the house, so she's the one that should be doing the chores around here, not my poor baby. She's working you to death.
She actually still believed all of that? My mother-in-law thinks like she is in the 60s. No wonder Daniel was acting so rude to me lately. His mother had been filling his head with these outdated ideas. We had agreed when we first bought a house that we'd split the chores and cleaning duties. Now he was trying to dump them all on me because I'm the wife? This was not going to be tolerated after all. I had married a partner, not someone that I would view as my master. I stepped in and confronted them about it. You can't possibly mean that. Daniel has his share of chores too, and I have work. How am I supposed to get everything done around here when I have a full-time position on top of all these extra chores?
Well, why do you have a job if you're the wife? You should be at home while my son earns a living for you both.
But he lost his job. I'm the only one making money here. Daniel, say something.
I think she's right. You should submit to me and stay home and clean the house. After all, I'm the man of the house, and it's my duty to go and earn the money here.
My spineless, lazy husband was siding with his mother over me. What a rat! I was boiling with rage at both of them. Over the next few days, the arguments got worse between his mother and I. She was constantly making me do more chores while her son lazed about, not lifting a single finger to help me. Whenever I asked him, he just said it was the woman's job to clean. I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I had to stay with my husband and his psychotic mother and be their little maid. Sometimes I felt like they'd purposefully leave giant messes for me to find and clean. But then one day...
I noticed you were spending a lot of time on that computer of yours, and your chores weren't getting done, so I threw that dusty thing away. You're welcome.
Yeah, I used that computer because it's my job. I rushed out to the trash and found my computer smashed up in the dumpster. I couldn't contain my rage anymore, so I confronted Daniel about it and told him that he had to choose. Either she goes, or I would. Daniel was conflicted for a second, but then he said,
How could I ever choose a girl over my own mom? That would be wrong.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wasn't just a girl. I was his wife. It was clear, though, that he had made his choice. I called into work and told them what happened to my computer. Luckily, it was covered by their policies and insurance, so they shipped me a new one free of charge. Since the house was entirely in Daniel's name, I knew that I had nothing to lose by leaving, and so I packed my bags and left Daniel and his mother in the house alone. I rented out a hotel room and stayed there for a while before I found a cheap apartment all to myself. Thankfully, I had a large savings from all my work, so I was doing fine. I even got a promotion recently because of all the extra hours and hard work that I was putting in. It still bothered me that Daniel would choose his mother over our marriage, but as time passed, I began to understand that having her move in was a blessing. It showed me what kind of man Daniel truly was. Some months passed and Daniel called me, begging me to come back home. He and his mom were running out of money since they didn't have anyone with a job around to pay for things. I just laughed and told him he should have thought about that before he made the only one who was supporting him storm out. Then I hung up on him. It felt good to tell him off, although I wished that his mother had also been on the line so that I could have had words with her as well. Another couple of months flew by, and a mutual friend of ours told me that they had seen a sign on our front door that read, "Foreclosure." Apparently, the two of them couldn't afford to pay for the mortgage, and they fell behind on the payments until the bank was forced to foreclose on them. I spoke with a friend of mine that worked for the bank, and I asked her what would become of the house. As it turned out, the bank only wanted someone to take over the mortgage, and since I had gotten a promotion along with a raise, I felt confident that I could hold and pay for the house all by myself. And so, I put a bid in for the home, and the bank approved right away. 2 weeks later, my ex-husband and his mother were evicted from the home, and I was given the keys to my house, and I headed straight over there to begin moving my things back in. It was a bit lonely at first, and I missed my apartment. But having the whole house to myself was amazing. I don't know if he realizes that I was the one that bought the house from the bank, and I don't particularly care. I'm just enjoying being back in my house. Maybe one day he'll come crawling back to me. But if he thinks that I'll take him back, now that I've seen who he truly is, then he will be in for a rude awakening when I slam the door in his face. Thanks for watching. Please like the video for the algorithm.